Hello, chess friends. This is International Master Valeri Lilov talking, and welcome all to today's lecture on YouTube about defense and how to master it. You see, there are a lot of people who often wonder what defense is all about and how to make it successful. I mean, defense is a hard task. It's not like attacking or like planning. Even though attacking and planning require precision, defense is just a different, tough, and sometimes very painful phase of the game that a lot of people would prefer to avoid altogether. So my task today is going to be to show you not just like the philosophical structure on how defense works, but to give you methods, to give you concrete suggestions as to how you can use defense practically in your games so you can benefit from sometimes defending utterly challenging and difficult positions that would usually resign or easily lose otherwise. You see, I want to begin with a very short example of my story. Like when I was a weak player, and that was actually some time ago, but I still remember it so vividly in my memory. I used to play against a lot of strong players by the example and the advice of many masters who told me, okay, if you play strong players, they'll beat you, but you'll genuinely learn. At a certain point, you'll start drawing and beating them, so just keep playing. With whom you play, you become. However, it was just so tough because I wasn't playing up to that level and I had to keep playing and keep losing and keep playing again. And something very positive happened of this utterly painful experience. I developed some really good ideas on how defense works, even when you actually have a terrible position, even if you make some mistakes. So while I was obviously learning from my mistakes and trying to correct them for the upcoming games, I picked up some very valuable techniques which helped me later on at the time when I became a professional player also. So I'm going to share those with you guys, and I'm going to present you some very effective master games on how great players have also used them. So first we'll start with the concept of stabilization. I'd like to bring up a beautiful example that explains exactly what stabilization is and how that works. So give me a second. I'm going to copy a game that's probably one of my favorites about how defense works, and I hope that you'll be able to learn from it as much as I did the first time I saw it. So wait on for a second so I can copy the game here, the names, because a lot of people are actually asking me about the names. So okay, here we go. All right. So this was a game that was played between the great players Tartakova and Emily Lasker, Savili Tartakova and M. Lasker. You see, Lasker and Tartakova are very famous. But basically, Lasker was incredibly good at prophylaxis and handling sometimes even incredibly challenging and tough positions. So let's take a look in this game and learn from it. Flip the board so we can get all the black pieces, and we can see and learn from his technique. After the moves of c4, e5, we'll go through the opening rather quickly. White played a3, which is not a very popular move nowadays. However, it stops the annoying bishop b4. Black did knight f6, e3, and bishop e7. After that, white played queen c2, and as black castled, white just did knight c3. Pawn to d6 is what black picked up to do, and after knight f3, rook e8 happened. The opening isn't anything impressive and isn't quite related to what we're speaking about today. However, what black wanted to do was just a fine-tuned development with no major weaknesses or big holes. That wasn't enough, though, to get the harmonious position that he needed, because the problem is, even if you get a fine-tuned development, if it's not active enough or if you let your opponent to advance a little bit, chances are you might actually get a little passive and backward for the most part of the game. That's something very apparent that happened after d5 and h3, which almost forced black to retreat and go right down with his bishop on d7. And it really did not feel all that good. So white played knight h2, and now black played queen c8. we're going quickly through this stage because I really don't want to mention too many things about a game or examples that are solely uh, going to explain how defense works. Essentially, Black was trying to prepare himself for a potential c6 move, but in fact, after queen c8 and then e4, Black did knight g6, trying to regroup his pieces a little more close to the king side. And so now I played f4. E takes f4 and bishop takes f4. And this is the moment where a lot of people will find this to be a challenging position. Why is that? Well, it's actually very simple. If you look at the position, you realize that White is having a very good development, a simple way to go on the f-file, and launch different possibilities for attacking. Now, that doesn't mean that we're losing. It just means we're actually starting to defend. Now, I want you to understand something. Defense is not something you want. It is something you need. When you become what I often call as, on the back foot, when you start being on the back foot, you're in a position that will require quite some defense to prepare and deal with the major threats of the opponents. But until you get to that point where your opponent's pieces are either equal or worse than yours, this means it will take a lot of fine-tuning and action-driven maneuvers so you could really get up with your position and deal with the defense on an absolute basis. So it's not that easy. However, there is something that we could start with. So essentially, Black isn't on defense, but he's getting there. So what would you like to do right now, seeing that we're more passive and White is ready to launch an attack? So, okay, now let's see what your comments are. By the way, I encourage you to bring me with any commentary or any comments as well, so that I could ultimately bring you with my suggestions and my comments to you. So what should Black do now? I'd like to hear what you have to say about this position. By the way, while you're thinking about that, I'd like to mention that there is a very effective training package, which is called the Devastating Defense. It's with a 50% discount for 4 absolutely amazing training DVDs by some of the best grandmaster teachers out there. It comes at a 50% price at a very cheap price. So if you're interested in the topic and you want to get better and learn some new methods, I really encourage you to check the link below this video. Big offer, and it's really great material. I'm telling you because I know the teachers, I know these lectures, and they're amazing. Anyway, let's get back to the game and talk about this. I got a lot of suggestions like c6, knight e5, as well as knight takes f4. Which of them are good and which are not? Now, c6 is a fine move, but there is a small problem. White will play bishop g5, challenging our knight and making us even more passive. Knight e5 is a possibility, but that will suffer from the same result. White would do bishop g5. I have to tell you, the easiest way on how you can get yourself out of a pressured situation, or being on the back foot, as I like to call it, is when you exchange pieces. Of course, exchanges could be risky because sometimes we might be exchanging a very good piece that you like to keep, but chances are that a lot of times you'll be able to exchange kind of useless or, well, not so important pieces in order to leave your opponent with less potential or material to make his attack. So for this reason, Black picked up to do knight takes f4. That's called the part of neutralizing. It's important that you exchange pieces because that ultimately takes out the source of power that your opponent will use to create threats, and that is his active pieces. If he's left with less pieces or less active pieces at the very least, we'll have the chance to, well, counter him, or at least make sure that he doesn't have any significant threats for quite a while. So there we go. Knight takes f4, rook takes f4, and now we have to continue. Let's see if anybody could give me a suggestion on what Black should do over here. So Lasker had to worry about White coming down. He has rook f1, knight g4, most likely his queen will regroup. Of course, it's quite a while before he gets any of that, but we have to be careful. Does anybody have a suggestion on what black should do at this point? I really want to hear what you guys have to say. So please, give me your thoughts. Bishop e7. Absolutely. There's no other way but to actually pass through the painful stage of regrouping your pieces. You have passive pieces, and this is not going to help you. For this reason, I do recommend that you take those passive pieces and you just bring them on. You bring them to the advanced and capable positions that they need so they could feel stronger. A little move of the kind like bishop e7 definitely helped out a lot. Now we can see why that's important. The bishop is going to get ready. We'll have more possibilities coming up with c6 and other moves. And yeah, I actually quite like the idea. Step by step, we'll turn it into something more. But for now, let's just bring the bishop where it belongs. So after that move, everything looks fair and good. So let's see exactly what white did. In the end, after that move, white played rook a to f1. And now that I'm going to tell you about the nightmare of the defense. And I want to explain why I call it a nightmare. I call it a nightmare because it is a nightmare to be in such a situation. It is a nightmare to be in a situation where basically you don't know where to go or how to move or how to ever make something out of your position. So how do we think or plan in a position where we don't know what to do? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about it. Before I tell you black's move, I want you to think carefully and let me know, what would you do? Would you go for an exchange? Would you try to go quickly with it, like opening the c6? Would you do some maneuvering first? Or what would you do and why? Try to describe why. That will help me to go into your thought process and provide you with some specific suggestions. c6, a very nice suggestion. Now, how is that going to work out? Well, I like the move because in the end, we're threatening to exchange and open up the road for the queen. Black didn't play it. Why? Because if he did, if he did go for that move, I don't think it would have worked actually all that well, even though this move actually feels pretty all right. What's the problem? What's the issue? If we do go with the move of c6 in this position, which seems very reasonable and very, like pitchy, okay, we put it in the right time, everything is clear. You have to think about the opponent's response. You would have done knight g4. And I'll suddenly realize that in case of a take, he's going to capture us here. He might even play with the move of, actually after the knight takes f, bishop takes, rook takes f6. And you see there's knight takes d5, which will be a killer. So we can't quite do that. Even in case we try something like bishop takes g4, there was room with bishop takes g4, and the c6 really turned out useless. It lost the tempo. It's great to get back in the game with some moves like that, but you have to be careful. It doesn't work. Anybody? a5, knight c4. Okay, well, that's good. I like a5, but these are the empty moves. It doesn't seem to do much. So what else do we do? Rook f8. Absolutely. See, I'm totally against backward moves. I hate those moves. And yet I'm suggesting a backward move. Why? Because you have to understand where the core of the problem is. Now you have to understand this. A bad or defensive position, because yes, the defensive positions are genuinely bad. You don't want to be in this position. The fact that you have to play it and you can be successful out of it does not mean that you want it to be there in the first place. So defensive is often a synonym for a bad position. It's not a bad position just because the opponent started attacking. It's usually bad for a particular reason. In most times, that reason is that the opponent has pressure, and pressure is identified by two reasons. If you remove one of the two reasons, depending on what is the reason for this particular situation, oftentimes you will improve your defense a lot and you'll get closer to the desired position. Just not being on the back foot, not being constantly just pushed back by the opponent. So the first reason is if you have a big weakness. So obviously you got to defend that weakness and you have to give your best in covering it. However, in this position, there is no major weakness. So what's the second problem? The second problem why we'll be on the back foot, this means the bad position defending, is because you will be passive. And no, I don't mean like you have all your pieces down and backward, although that's the case here. It's just that your pieces will do nothing good. They wouldn't be able to compete or counterattack or, like oppose against the opponent's invading forces. So this is the time where I got to tell you, if you have the second problem, like not a permanent weakness that your opponent is challenging and he's already like created, but you're rather under pressure because your pieces aren't up to par, you have to figure out how to maneuver them. The move of rook f8 was a perfect move because now black is preparing to regroup his own bishop towards e8. Then you could think of a move like queen d8, knight d7, and knight e5. So that slowly each piece of black can turn into an actual attacker versus some of white's pieces. It was beautiful to see how literally every piece is going to take itself on the best position possible, and how in a few moves black achieves it, therefore pushing white back and leaving his attack with no prospects. It was a great start, so that after queen d3, black played queen d8, and then after queen d8, bishop e8, queen g3, queen d8, and when white did knight d1, there was knight d7. Regrouping is that part which really sets your pieces onto so much better positions that you really need and want to see them there. It was a great setup. Now we have that knight coming down to e5, and now we see that besides white being unable to do anything that's special, we're actually making these baby steps, yet very important baby steps, towards getting each of our pieces further. Is it painful? Yeah, hell yeah, it is. Nobody wants to be in a position like that. I don't want to be in a position like that. You don't want to be. But what do you do? What do you do? Resign? No. This is the real test here of your patience, of your courage, of your ability to improve your position and make it playable. So actually, there's one hook through all that process. Keep in mind, until your opponent is able to transform that attack or pressure into something more tangible, like material or so, you're always in a good position to keep up and play more. So right now what we see is that black knew white hasn't got anything tangible yet, and everything that he's making is rather temporary. So this gives us the time and the possibility to regroup. Now in case of h4, there's bishop h5, so we could see in case of knight f5, in fact, the same thing is likely going to happen. We can even do h5. So step by step, our pieces started being in positions to quite effectively confront the opponent. So white played queen f2. And what do? I want to hear your thoughts about this position. So kind of prophylaxis. Not really. We're going to talk about prophylaxis later today, but this was just simple regrouping. Something that will handle the main problem. Bad pieces which allowed the opponent to dominate with his. Knight of knight e5. Now, I want you to be careful. Do you know how easy it is to lose a defensive position? It's super easy. It takes one small mistake. Your opponent is just going to punch in, get the material, or take that, like pressure into something more tangible, and you're toast. Even if you continue defending, now it wouldn't need to play precisely to win. You'll be material up and you'll win it sooner or later. So that actually requires you to think in from a very specific perspective. You have to think from your opponent's perspective. Every time when you're defending, you have to know that the secret of the successful defense lies within finding the opponent's best attacking opportunities. Because when you're able to do that, you will know exactly what serious threats he's going to put against you and how you have to defend against them to not let him convert, to not let him get that pressure or the temporary advantage into something more tangible. Now this is key. If we play knight e5, white will just do rook takes g5, and this is it. We're losing it. We can't do that. Can we do rook bishop h5? I mean, it looks like a cool move. Yes, we could. I think that's a good possibility. Although I'm not really a fan of the exchange, because we'll realize that we'll be exchanging a bishop that could protect cover the light squares for a bishop that wasn't. You have to think about this from your opponent's perspective. Right now, he had some very good ideas here, so we couldn't do that. Let's see if anybody else has a better idea. Anyone? Bishop h6, not very good. You know, white will still do knight a5, and you're not going to be in good positions. I want to hear something that, you know, will help your position to improve, will make it better. A difficult situation. There are so many moves. Now, is it possible to play bishop g6? To be honest with you, yes, it is. You can play the bishop in the g6, but how beneficial is that? I mean, it's a good square, but then we'll just play knight f3 usually, and then in case he would play with bishop to the h6, he plays knight d4. Again, looking at it from the white perspective, we're just going to be on the back foot for a while. Bishop takes e3. How good is that? We'll exchange that, and then it seems like we're all good, right? Not really. I mean, keep in mind that your Lasker bishop was, in fact, a protector of the king. So yes, a little less pieces, but I don't know. I don't think it's the best. See, came up with an even better idea. Valerie, why not rook f7? Too passive. And 3-4 of you suggested the right idea. You see, and that is interesting. A lot of players look at these positions just from one perspective, the perspective of the defender or the one who's like constantly being pushed in the corner. Don't think like that alone. Try to think of the position from another angle. What if we were able to counterattack? Black played h5. In fact, you realize that because white didn't pay enough attention, there's a chance to play h4. And then if white doesn't move over rook f3, there could be knight c5, hitting against the e4 and taking that really in the right level. If after that move white plays rook g4, we realize that there's bishop h5 and we win the exchange. In fact, it was so shocking that white didn't even believe that losing the exchange would actually lose his advantage. In fact, he was going to get the light square domination. And yet, one of the reasons why white sacrifice doesn't work here, and his whole subsequent attack does not work, is because you need to know the fuel of the attack are the threats. Okay, the base are the active pieces, the fact that the opponent could be pushed back, maybe weaknesses, but all these things are reasons. It doesn't drive the attack forward. It's just an addition. The key part of any attack is the ability to create threats. If you can keep your opponent from the ability to create any huge threats against your position, anything that can help him to convert, to transform the position into something more tangible, you're good to go. You don't have to worry. That's exactly what black did here. He did bishop h5, then he took the rook on the g4, and as soon as white played knight takes g4, black did knight c5, driving a serious challenge, or he could have actually played that to drive serious challenge against white. Queen e8 happened, which is almost the same. But it's kind of amazing because white was the one who lost out of his attack. It's crazy. But it's good at the same time. Bishop f3, knight e5. Knight takes d5, queen takes d5. The defense is basically over, and white is losing. I mean, the rest of the game is only worth it just to see a couple more sequences. But you'd say white lost because of a blunder. And you might be right. He didn't have to lose his rook out there. But in reality, there wasn't too much that he could have done after f6. And the whole idea is regrouping really brings you what is keeping you backward and behind at all times. Passivity. If you stay passive, your opponent's attack and everything will constantly flow. But if you can get into the position to challenge, to have your pieces in more active places, it will naturally force the opponent in a difficult position. So that was a very good idea. h4 and bishop h5. Now white played knight f5, bishop takes g, queen e8. It kind of made him to defend, and then he did knight takes h4. Now let's see if anybody will have an idea on how black should continue here. So where did white go wrong? Well, we'll go back to that later. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about what black has to do. I mean, keep in mind this is just an introduction, so I'm going to talk a lot deeper about the subject of defense. But what should black do now? Yeah, f6 stuff does weaken the e6, but it's really about how white can exploit it. I don't think white was really in condition to take much advantage of it, at least not there. Winning the b2, I don't think it really matters. You see, in a dynamic position like this one, it's about who takes the initiative, who can create more pressure. It's not about a pawn. We care about something a lot more. We care about being better and more active than our opponent. If we exchange and take b2, he'll do bishop g4. So he's going to go towards e6, and our exchange advantage wouldn't matter. We would have given up the activity. So yes, absolutely. Takes h4, and then play along with f5. A super beautiful, excellent move that sets up the possibility for us to have more active pieces. And that's really the best thing, the best way to go. And you know, like actually what we need to do is number one, remember that all the attack, all the pressure comes from somebody's active pieces. This means if it's your opponents who has active pieces, you'll be the one that you'd like to who actually oppose or challenge his. So that was a very, very good thing to do. So after we continue with f5, we realize the problem. So it's like white isn't just a material down. He's already losing it. Why? Because he even lost his activity. The final stage of the defense is when you've ultimately beat your opponent at activity. When you have at least equal, if not better, piece activity than him. That's when the defense ends and you can go back to the game. Some successful defenses like this one and gives you a huge material advantage. Others don't. But whatever it is, when we already get more active or at least equally active to the opponent, it's all we need. Black continues with the exchange, takes, here, captures. As I said, the pawns really don't matter. What matters is just to be more active. Even the queen came back to f6 in this case. And so I think that was great. Really, it's just a very effective way to make it work. If the white queen takes an e4, we can give a check, and we can do another one, and then we can take with the rook, attacking the c4, going up to d4. It's beautiful, very effective, and really easy. And that's how it's supposed to be. That was really one of the best ways to do it. Very good and very consistent. So the reality of the situation is that after d takes d, white played queen takes to the c7. But then black picked up to do e4. And after that, queen of c7. It's kind of honorable to see how consistent black was with every move that he intended to exchange some of white's pieces. After queen takes b7, there's queen e1 check. Here, queen e5 check. And then we realize that white just cannot make anything with his pieces. Do you know how I know this? There's no threats. There's no threats. You know what we have? The threats on our own. Black gets into counterattack now, which is exactly what we need. Rook b8 plus rook b1 plus e3 plus rook b2 plus everything. This is just the finish of the game. I didn't need to show it, but I wanted to show it for anybody who is wondering. So obviously this is a very interesting game, but what really made this so successful? Besides white's blunder, what really mattered is I'm going to answer 3 questions that you're probably wondering. First, how do we avoid getting in such situations? Now, you can't always avoid that. But one thing I want to tell you is do not play passively. One of the easiest ways is to avoid backward moves or moves with which you set up your pieces behind, and always look for a way to guarantee your pawns more space so they can give you more room and action. If you can't do that, we could likely say you will sooner or later be forced on the backside and your opponent will attack you. That's something that happened even though black had no major weaknesses. So that's first, how to avoid getting into a defensive position of this kind. Second, make sure you cut the opponent's power. Even if your opponent doesn't have any immediate threats, chances are he's going to get them sooner or later. The reason why he has the ability to make threats, that source of power, are his active pieces. If you cut that off, he'll lose his source of power. The pieces, one by one, are what actually makes his attack work. When you take them out, you cut off his ability to threaten you. So that was very powerful. And then the third thing, what often gets you in trouble aren't even the threats, although they're a vital part of your opponent's attack. You'll find how to create some. What makes his position superior is the vast difference between his and your pieces being on the backside defensive and practically terrible. The best way to do things in your favor, to rig the position, in a major way, is when you regroup. You have the time, as long as your opponent has no immediate threats or challenges, but you have to at least think about getting some of the worst place pieces, like that bishop and the knight. Like, took the time to regroup and thereby make his pieces so good so they could oppose and challenge as well as restrict some of white's best forces. It was so good that even black could take material and feel good about it, as white could never create the threats, the soul of the attack, the real fuel of any success. It was just not there. I hope that you like this game as much as I did. I think it was a really instructive example. And by the way, I'm going to collect and save each of these games in a PGN file. So if you guys want me to send them to you so that you can add some notes and whatever, just please send me an email to valeri.lilov@gmail.com. I'm going to bring up my email, so I can send you like the PGN with today's material, as well as some extra training material on defense. So do email me if you like, and I'll be glad to send you. Or you can actually check my site and send me a message directly through there. It's faster, it's easier, and defense is, well, my favorite topic, even if it sounds like it's a painful one to go with. All right, so I want to show you another example and a few other patterns you can remember. We're just scratching the surface here. So what else can I show you? What else do you need to know about defense? Okay, let me bring up another very classical game. Now, this game is super instructive for a few reasons. Let me copy it up. Just give me a second. Okay, so this is it. Just give me a second, please, because I'm trying to make sure it's there. And yes, it is. This is a good position to talk about. And you know who played it? It was Michael Tal. Yeah, have you ever actually thought of Michael Tal defending? I mean, Michael Tal was the greatest attacker ever. He was so brilliant at attacking that looking at his games, I would never forget the memorable game. Unfortunately, I was never really able to like catch it like in any database. It was between him and I think it was Portish, Talon Portish. If somebody has that game and remember about the game, please email or message me. I've never seen it in a database. I read it from a Russian magazine where Tal sacrifices basically 3 pieces and he keeps on playing and he beats the guy. He beats Portish out of a very, like usual position just with 3 pieces down. So he was an incredibly dynamic player. Yet, let's have a look at how he's defending. So this is going to be fun. He's playing black versus Robert Hubner, one of the best German grandmasters, one of the most experienced grandmasters in the 1970s. So the game started with c4, knight f6, knight c3, e6, and knight f3, which black responded with bishop b4. This is the beginning of the Nimzo, and the black main idea is to challenge white's center. That's right. If you think the idea is to double the pawns, white has many ways to fix them or prevent you from doubling. The idea of black is to use this bishop to exchange the knight, therefore kind of weakening his center control, and c5 is exactly for that. It's actually going to fight for another square. It's fighting for d4. So anyway, c5, g3, knight c6, bishop g2, we castle. He does the very same thing. And queen e7. Now, even though black isn't playing passively in this game, as you will see in a moment, he actually gets in a pretty defensive position. So in a moment, you realize what happens? And I want to point out to that moment so I can explain to you how to evaluate the perspective. This is going to be a very important, very integral part of this game, so pay attention. After d3, black played h6. Okay, a pretty useful move, just opening a flight square and taking out g5. Nothing special. White plays e4. And now, black played d6. Okay, so what do I mean by perspective? The perspective is when you're looking at a position, you can probably evaluate the perspective like, okay, I believe my pieces are going to go here and here and here. And I believe my opponent's pieces are going to go there and there and there. So sometimes it's impossible to change the perspective, even though it's not a very good one. It could be because of the pawn structure, it could be because of the way the pieces are placed, or just because of the situation. But if you can, I'll recommend you to do so. So let's talk about, let me do the process for you so you can see exactly how to evaluate the perspective. Because again, let's talk about what you don't want. You don't want to get on a defensive position in the first place. So if you get in that, okay, you can use all these little tricks and things to make sure you're defending as best as you could. But I'd recommend you to try and avoid such a situation in the first place. So one of the best ways to do that is to have a perspective. The perspective works like that. If I have to think about the position in present tense, I'm going to say that the perspective for white is going to be to play the bishop out, move his knight, and probably think about f4. That's going to guarantee him a lot of space and the possibility to advance with f5. I'd say that black, on the other hand, will try rook b8, a6, and b5 with the plan to open up the b file. It doesn't look as active, but at least it will do something. And what do you think of that? Just doesn't look right. I mean, even if b5 looks like a cool move, how cool is that going to be in comparison to white's pawns and other pieces advancing towards the king side? That's what I mean by perspective. You evaluate a few moves ahead on how the pieces will look like, not like what the variation, but how the pieces will look like, so you can see the perspective, and based on that, assess if you want to go into that situation, or maybe you want to shift it, you want to change it. Now, in that particular case, I don't believe I can stop that from happening. I mean, white will definitely play knight h4, bishop e3, so Tal did the best he could. But sometimes, like imagine if the knight wasn't there, we would have played f5 or e5 immediately to make sure that this doesn't even happen, that you don't let the opponent that amount of space and that huge ability to challenge you. So keep that in mind. Have a perspective. At any point, at any position, try to picture on where the piece is, and the pawns will look in a few moves from there, from now, and then think if he's starting to get more space, if he's starting to pressure you or challenge you in a way, you don't want to be in that situation. So you might actually want to change certain things to make moves that exchange some of his good pieces or take him more space, so he can avoid getting in this cramped position or cramped situation. So white played knight h4 as expected, and now black did the best he could. Obviously, you need active counterplay. Now, do not sit there. There are two things that kill the defense. First, it's the passive pieces. Just so if you have bad pieces, that's definitely going to kill whatever defense you're doing. It's like, imagine a boxing match in which somebody just keeps defending. I mean, what do you think is going to happen? Now, in a boxing match, there is a ring bell. In chess, there isn't. So you can't expect that the bell is going to save you. Your opponent is going to keep punching and punching and punching until he knocks you out. So the idea is that you have to fight back. And one of the best ways is to just make sure your pieces are up so they can confront what we see in the first game. And then there's the second thing. You need active play. You need to make your opponent's attention draw from advancing his plan towards protecting what you are doing. And so black played rook b8. His idea was to achieve these two things. Get good development and good pieces that will possibly counter white. And of course, make sure that our pieces move forward and they help us build a sufficient counterplay. Now, how sufficient it is, we don't know. But at least active counterplay is going to make him worry. It's going to slow him down. And that's what you want. So white plays bishop e3. And I have the first question to you guys of this game. Black has good pieces, good set of bishop, knight, pawn, rook, whatever. So he's supposed to find out a way to play with them. How would you recommend black should continue now? Okay, take a look at this position and provide me with your thoughts and recommendations. Now, while you're doing that, I like to mention that a lot of these concepts and suggestions I mentioned are important and very practical. So it's hard to really study them from a book. For this reason, I encourage you to check the link below this lecture, because you can find like a special devastating defense. It's called a special course on how to defend successfully at a 50% discount for a fantastic fee. You can basically get 4 absolutely brilliant chess master DVDs and training tutorials with every single practical concept you need to know. I'm just mentioning only of a few of the most. You need to know all of them. For this reason, I do encourage you to click that link. I'm going to send a link on the chat, and you can get that and learn a great deal from it. So what do we do? B6 to the C4 looks good. I think it's not a bad idea. We could definitely do it, for sure. And that's the move that black did. We need to open lines, but more importantly, that helps us to counter. See, little by little, that's one of my most favorite expressions, step by step, black is able to gather around and really set up the key pieces on their most valuable positions. So being around the center, not only that black is able to challenge and approach, put pressure against white's e4 pawn, but also there's the knight on c3 that's being put under pressure. And this actually looks great. With the 2 bishops, the knights, and the rook ready, we see how everything starts to look awesome. White plays rook e1, and black has queen b7. It's actually not looking so bad right now, because even though in reality it seemed much more active for white on the king side at first, he wasn't able to produce any real threats from that. On the contrary, black had a very consistent rook and pawn maneuver, which helped him to get an open line and many good squares. The bishop maneuver was also pretty awesome. So now we have the bishop, queen, knight, and all other pieces more or less connected and very active. That helps us to simply advance and get a masterful counterplay. So white played bishop c1. What are we supposed to do now? I'd like to hear you guys suggest what is black's best way to go in this position. Tell me what you think. Is white defending? Yeah, sure. That's what we made him do. But what should Tal do now? It's a great looking knight, beautiful bishop that we have. So we're not really defending all that much in this case. But we will. Eventually, when he plays f5 and g4, we have to expect it. So what do you think black has to do now? Queen a6. Absolutely. The more problems you set against your opponent, the more you divide his attention. The more you will make him forget about his own attack and what he was doing a moment ago, and push him onto a defensive side. With a move like queen a6, we have a nice pressure against c4, while at the same time we keep our strong knight, the good bishop, and even the rook all together on perfect positions. When that's done, the position looks really awesome. So white saw the danger. He couldn't play b3 due to bishop takes to c3. He couldn't do anything else. Most of his pieces are being quite backward. And so he did the move of e5. Black played d takes to the e5, f takes to e5, and now there was knight h7. Step by step, we realize that white's attack turns into nothing, simply because he has known of the key aspects of a successful attack, or actually of any attackers of that matter. There are 2 key aspects: active pieces and pressure threats. They're just missing now. White has no active pieces, and he's got no threats. So it's actually quite interesting that it is white who turns defending in a moment or two. Exchange, takes, rook e3, and knight g5. And you're going to say, Valerie, where's the defense in this game? I mean, black is just nailing it, like he's just crushing white. Yeah, but this is only due to a very active play that simply didn't allow white to put you on the back side. And remember, the best defense is not to get defending on the first place. If you can avoid getting into that position, that is a true success. So with knight g5 on the line, white had to do queen g2, which led to queen a6 again, and then white played b3. So obviously we see that black is terrific. He's got very good pressure. He's not defending anymore. So does anybody have a suggestion on how black should continue now? What do we do now? How to play this good-looking position? Rook b d8. You know what? It's not a bad move. I kind of like rook b to d8 because it's going to set up the rook at a good place. We'll have a nice position for it, and we'll be able to, well, sort of crush him. But not really. Black had another possibility. What black did in this case was the move of knight takes h3. It was a perfect knight takes h3 and then bishop takes the c3 combination, which pretty quickly leaves white behind. And in fact, we're the ones who are attacking right now. So now white played queen g4. And I think this is a very important position to think about. Because you know what? When you play a sharp or a tactical position, there's always this chance you might get under defense. Now that could happen for a number of reasons. Maybe it's your opponent you just like took the initiative for a few moments and he can attack you. Maybe you just left a bit of a weakness. Whatever it is, there's a spontaneous quick attack that he's able to make due to the current circumstances. Now, how do we handle a situation like this? Do we stabilize and go right back full defense, or do we actually make something else? Well, I'm going to tell you what's the secret of any successful defense. Because yes, even if you don't believe it, there is a secret. The secret of any successful defense is to find out what your opponent is able to base his attack on and fight against it. Every pressure or an attack is going to have a base point. Without a base point, he's not going anywhere. It's not even dangerous, not even an attack. The only base point right now for white was the fact that we have two weaknesses, the c3 and the pin. This gives him the chance to think about attacking c3, going after h6, and using threats. So once you have determined the base point, as I like to call it, you have to figure a way to deal with that, or find a way to restrict your opponent's ability to use them. He did it very actively now at queen takes a2. Sometimes you can do it in a simple move, defensive. Although I'll always encourage you to look at the active defense. Active defense are moves with which you can bring your pieces on more active positions, and they'll very naturally serve the protection. With a move like this, we realize after rook takes to the c3, obviously knight e2 check wouldn't do much good because he has got bishop takes h. But then we remove the second base, which is, okay, now the bishop is gone, remove the queen, and the sooner the queen is out, he wouldn't be able to play bishop h6 and use that pin. Even if he plays queen g5 alone, the queen can't make much. But when he takes on h5, black plays knight e2. And then he took on c3. And that was actually great. Determine the base points, as I like to call them, the base points of your opponent's successful, or maybe just prospective attack. There will always be one. It was a c3 bishop plus the pin that was making white's attack happen. When we remove both of them, he's left with nothing. There is no base points, therefore no danger to worry about. White played bishop h6, and then black did queen e2. Queen g5. Once again, the base point is the g7 this time. The white is pressuring, so black immediately covers it by hovering his queen back to h7, and that was it. Exchange. He cannot protect his bishop. Trade. Takes. Rook takes to the c3, and after rook d8, it was pretty clear that there is no more challenges or threats or anything else that white can do to make his position better. There was rook b d8 that black did in this position. There's the rook coming down to d3 as well. And actually, the game was pretty much over after that. I'm going to show the remaining moves because it's a tile game and I just can't cut it. But obviously, the game was completely winning after that. The two rooks come on the third rank. They keep attacking, and the game was over. So what are the real instructive points of this game? First of all, remember the perspective. Sometimes to avoid getting into backward positions or bad situations, you have to think about the perspective the pawn structure and the piece development is going to give you. So think in perspective. 3, 5 moves from now, imagine how the pieces will look. If you feel like the perspective just isn't great, that your pieces are going to be passive, don't ask yourself, why is it going to be bad, or can I get out? Don't. Just try to avoid this situation if you can. If you can, as black couldn't in this time, then try to figure out a way to start active counterplay. Black was able to use the two things that matter most when you want to make a successful defense. Active pieces, or better pieces, we could say, than they initially were, and an active play on the opposite side. That will usually drive the opponent's attention away or will create enough challenges or threats to make him deviate from the plan. And as you could see, White was never in condition to set any threats on the king side just because he didn't have the time. Even when he started with the e5, that drew no problem to black simply because there was no problem. There was really nothing that White could do as he was backward and behind and unprepared, so he launched an attack that kind of backfired, and it held black to start the counterattack. The most important part of this game, however, are the base points. Even quick attacks that your opponent will make are still dangerous enough for you to underestimate. That's why I like you to think about the base points. The base points are those strong challenges the opponent will create because of something. When you find out what's because, you know what's the base point of his attack. You remove that or you clear that, and then his attack will remain nothing. Black was able to push the white queen away, handle the c3 pressure, and then White's attack was just a vague attempt to make something happen, which never really came. So I hope that you like this little game. It was very instructive, in my opinion. Tal's example on what to do to avoid getting into situations like this, avoid getting into bad situations that you have to defend on the first place. And I hope you found it useful as well. Now let's take a look at another example that I like to bring. Now, once again, I do encourage you to email me if you would like to get the extra training material on defending. I've been more than happy to provide you with that. And also, if you have any, if you want me to send you the PGNs of the day's training, please do let me know. I'll be more than happy to send it to you. So you can send me an email to valeri.lilov@gmail.com, as well as my site if you would prefer to do that. It's a lot easier. My site is tigerlilov.com. Don't forget to also check the link below this video, which offers 50% of the ultimate training package. It's training package on defense by some of the top grandmasters today, giving invaluable practical lessons on how you can do it and be successful with the defense. So check it out. In any case, I like to bring up another very beautiful game about defense that actually makes you understand how defense works. Bring it up. Just give me 1 second. All right. For a second. Okay, I'm almost there. Just bear with me for a second. All right, this next game was played between Grunfeld and Polugaevsky, two very famous chess grandmasters. And I do hope you like this game because it was played in 1979. It was an incredible game, in my opinion, which shows so much of what we have to know about defense. I'm not going to tell you who wins or who doesn't, or how does the game end, because there are a lot of turns and everything. but I hope that you're able to learn as much from it as I did. So we're going to talk about the highlights. The game started with e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, exchange takes. This is the Sicilian defense. Very few people will not know about this opening. However, I'd like to bring up the idea that in the opening, in the line that white does, he's challenging against our knight on f6, getting a very fast development. And so black, on the other hand, is preparing to develop his pieces more flexibly and counter white. So I'm going to try and answer a very critical question. What do we do against early attacks? You know how many chess players have turned to me with that question? Like, what do I do, Valerie, if my opponent attacks early while I'm still unprepared? If you ever see that happening, you need to know two things. First, he's wrong. Unless you've blundered something, he's not supposed to work. Whatever he's doing is not supposed to work. And two, make sure that you give him nothing of value so he can get a tangible advantage. This means you have to try and stop whatever he's doing or whatever he's trying on a very basic level. What black wanted to do in here is to counter white, because he realized that if the knight falls, the game is over. However, most of the defenses that you can do on such an early stage are going to be easy. And as long as you don't let your opponent to get anything tangible, he's going to be his attack is going to be a failure. Taking the f6 just doesn't work, because then black was going to take the bishop. So what we see is that as white played queen e2 and then black played knight after d7, long side castles and knight c6, we realize that white's own pieces, development or anything, is just going to matter nothing. It doesn't actually matter. His challenges and attacks are simply not possible. So you see, if you ever encounter an early attack, as long as you keep everything stable so that your opponent does not get anything tangible, it's going to fail. It's just scary, and it's supposed to make you intimidated and playing bad. So just do this one thing. Step away from the immediate danger and continue with a very simple, straightforward development. If you do that, you'll never have to worry, because your opponent just doesn't have the means to produce more threats and possibilities to the position. Black did a very beautiful thing here, which was to play h6, and shortly after that, complete his development. Yes, it does look like white has an active pawn and some open lines, but tell me one thing. Do you believe or you don't believe? Doesn't matter, because he's got no clear way of setting a threat against black. And so black was confident enough to know that not only this rushed attack would turn out complete failure in terms of preparation and development, but also it helped black to do the counterattack. And let's talk a bit about a counterattack now. Counterattacking is the chance where you take an opportunity, you seize the ability to advance and tactically threaten your opponent while he's still behind and actually weak on a certain area of the board. Not only that, it will draw his attention away from the attack, as I mentioned earlier, but one thing that will do is that it can give you the initiative. It can help you to create big sequences. Now we see that knight b1 will be just a terrible idea. It will even give black a powerful outpost of his bishop. So white decided, you know what? I'm going to sacrifice. And that was total rubbish. Because the truth is, even though Grunfeld was one of the most famous players at his time, he didn't realize that there is something which I call potential. The potential isn't just about having some space and active pieces. You must know that your opponent is weak enough before you start engaging these type of tactics and threats. So black found a perfect way that simply held white's attack off. I'm going to give you the chance to find it, and this will show you how even the most optimistic type of attack that looks great at first really fails when there's not enough preparation to it. White's last move is clear. He wants to pin us twice on c6 and maybe go for a move like rook d8 checkmate. So what do you think? How do we bring here a good defense? Anyone? Does anybody have a suggestion? Rook c8, possibly, but then white would do the move of queen takes to c6 or bishop takes to c, and then there's like the rook d8 big threat. We can't do that. Knight b3, beautiful, absolutely. He can't take with the pawn because we're going to discover a check against this king. Can't take with the queen because he'll be losing his pressure on a8. And he can't take even with the pawn because we'll drop our rook with a discovered check him here, and take the bishop, which is actually pretty cool. And what was kind of amazing about that is that there is really no way for white to do something. It was very good. It was beautifully played out, and actually after knight to the b3, white realized the danger. I mean, maybe there's rook e1, queen d2. If you're thinking, actually now I believe the better is queen d7. The exchange, the take on b5 does not work after the exchange of rooks because of queen e8. So we could just play queen d7. And now white is running. If he goes here, we take him with a check. If he goes here, we do another check. And then it's white running away. We are attacking him, not him attacking us, actually. And that's just, it's really great. I like that very much. And indeed, the fact is white would have a little bit of a problem here. So the whole idea with knight b3 shows what potential is. The one who begins the attack must have really enough power, better than the opponent. And he doesn't. So after knight b3, we counter him in a super successful way. White moved this king right down to b1, which held black to stabilize. And that was it. Basically, white was just a piece down. On the next move, he tried rook d4 and setting things up, but the reality of the situation is that there are not enough threats. And so soon after g5, exchange, takes, and queen d3, even though white made a couple of threats, soon they were over. And then he was just a piece down with no compensation. So to sum it up, if you see quick diversions, as I call them, by your opponent in attacks, try to avoid losing anything tangible and keep it simple. If you do that, your opponent's attack, so to speak, is going to lead to nothing but lasting weaknesses in the middle game. The more important thing, however, is to understand that even if he looks like he's got a lot of potential and possibilities, as long as you're not worse in terms of development and preparation, you should not expect his attack to last. There is what I call the features. The features of the attack require not that one is prepared and starting with the challenge, but to make sure that he has better development, deployment than his opponent. White just didn't have that. And so his sacrifice didn't work because black was more than capable to counter. With knight b3, thus making his defense definitely successful. So I hope you liked each of these three examples. And again, guys, check out the link of with the 50% off on the perfect lectures. I can tell you, I can suggest you on defense. They're like four grandmasters explaining all little secrets, some of which I covered today, but there are so many more. And I felt like I had to rush a little bit in the end because I just wanted to give you so much more. But then I realized, check out that link. There's a lot of information. There's a lot of study materials, and you're going to enjoy being able to defend these tough positions and prove your opponent that he can break you. So thank you all for joining me tonight. I'm going to be having the next YouTube webinar on the coming Saturday, same time, 12 Eastern time, 12 p.m. or 6 p.m. Central European time. Thank you all for joining, and I'll see you next time.